Hi again. So I'm a little annoyed with myself because I left out basically the meat that I was going to tell you in that first part because I got super excited about the one detail that I remembered about um, slaves having the last names of their whatevers. So I was thinking about here's what I'm understanding, and this also goes to the fact that the parties didn't switch because. Um, the fact that the slaves were freed just shows that such a huge um, piece of the puzzle about what happened next and why. Okay, so like not a lot of people understand what this three-fifths of a person compromise thing was about. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm good. I can explain it to you like I have studied it thoroughly, but basically, um, this wasn't about what slaves uh what they considered slaves to be. It wasn't about like they're actually three-fifths human or anything like that, which shows you that the education system, which is part of the government, is helping us be ignorant and retarded about these things. I mean, why? There's no reason why we should have this much um, confusion about a solid fact. This is not a subjective thing. Why is everyone confused? Okay, so the three-fifths compromise was about because the Democrats. Now, if this doesn't sound like Democrats, like guys, they never switched. This is their MO all day long. Okay, so obviously slaves couldn't vote, right? So they didn't have the slaves didn't have the ability to vote. But what they wanted to do was count the slaves as part of the population. So this would be like because the electoral college would have made the southern states. I mean, they would have overpowered the southern states. This would be like it would be like Alabama having as many electorates as California or Texas. So they wanted to have them not be represented at all as voters, but be represented on the back end as, their populations. So you had these millions of people that were counted as part of their state, but no representation. Okay. So they had to compromise. The Republicans compromised and said you can count them as three-fifths of one voter, basically. So that's what they did. So, and they still had, with that, a very large representation, a very large, pool in the voting. Okay, so. And then the other thing that they did, which was really bizarre, and this was something that I just randomly did like a little Wikipedia search on the Democrats, and a lot of people don't will say, "Oh, don't go to Wikipedia." Well, it does exist for a reason, and the reason is everyone's going to Wikipedia. Don't get it twisted. Number two, it's just to get like a if you can just get a layman's understanding of things, you don't need to have this elaborate degree. In fact, when you get to a certain point, they're really just covering it all up to make it for them sound smart. So you can't even really trust the meaty sources all that much. You got to go to where either I go to Wikipedia because that's a largely leftist leaning place, and the facts that they are leaving you, it's like that's the stuff they want you to know. So is it lies necessarily? I don't think so. I think a lot of it is just the history that they find as being benign and they haven't changed it yet. So I wasn't trying to get a proper perspective. I'm just trying to get the basics understanding, the basic knowledge. So what it openly admits is that, it's not controversial or anything, but first of all, there was a moment in history for about a decade, 10 to 15 years, yes, Okay, what do you want? Okay, can you go in there and just put those in the toaster? I think it's on the right setting for you. Sorry about that. So, um, there was about a good 10 to 15 years where the Democrat Party, this is a very old party. It's not the first party, but it's like like the fourth. Okay, it's a very old party. Basically, the Democrat Party was the only party in America. Everyone was on the same page. It was called something like the old years or something like that. It wasn't that, but it was called something about, just how everybody was like, yeah, this is how we want to run the country. And it was the only party for like 10 or 15 years. This was like early 19th century, 1800 something. Well, so they had, obviously, when your party's that large, or when your party is the party, there's going to be some power, some people that think that they are just going to run the whole thing and whatever. So they were just so cocky, and then decades later, cut to 50, 60 years later, Abraham Lincoln is a candidate because I'm thinking, how did he win? Like, how in the world did he win? Okay, well, the Democrat Party apparently was just so cocky that they had like four candidates, like five people ran. That's how he won. He won like by like what, 31% or something, because it wasn't two, they didn't have two people running. They had like four people running, and three of them were Democrats. They had the Southern Democrat and the Northern Democrat and the Eastern Democrat and the Western Democrat. Like they just, because they ran the whole thing. It was a whole different thing then. So they were like, either way, we win. We're going to win one of these, which was kind of dumb. So they lost to Abraham Lincoln. And I don't know if they were not expecting that. I mean, I guess they just weren't expecting it because everything after that seemed pretty dang desperate. So that was interesting to me. The other thing that it was talking about was how, yes, there were different Democrats based on the area, which makes sense because people in the North had different lives or lived differently than the people in the South. So there was a Northern type of Democrat and a Southern type of Democrat. And it's not something that we can really picture today, but it said that that's how it was for a while and maybe died out totally by the 90s. And when it said that, I was like, oh my gosh, I just remembered. I remember I was born in 82, and I remember that there was a Northern Democrat and a Southern Democrat. I like, as soon as I read that, I was like, holy crap, that's part of my memory. They can't say they never did that because I remember that. And it was because it was the Southern Democrats. They were always doing the reenactments and stuff. It wasn't Republicans. Why would Republicans do that? So like, and it was like the Northern Democrats sort of looked down on the Southern Democrats, but it is what it is. They were all the same party, and it was the Southern Democrats that waved the flag, and it was like a big thing. It was like a for them. It was like a snobby thing to do, or it was like maybe not a snobby thing, but it was like you saw the Southern Democrat flag was like upper crust Southern Democrats. That's what they did. Like I remember that from like being little. Like that was the context that I remember. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot that." Like I bet you there's some TV show like Designing Women or something that you could find that and it would still be there. So anyway, so they're trying to erase that, like that was never a thing. Like they've always been social justice warriors and the party switch. Blah, that's such bogus garbage. Um, so anyways, um, on the other side, since I'm saying that, the Republican Party was basically made up of, yeah, it was made up of sort of like these ragtag, what would be considered maybe Green Party people, and not Green Party in the sense of, I don't know, Green Party, Libertarian, whatever, people who were just against the main thing. Because, I mean, if we're talking the Democrat Party is the only party, They're like, no, we're not down with this stuff. So it was people who were against slavery, obviously, and basically like walk away Democrats. That's what made the Republican Party. It's the Democrats that left the Democrat Party over slavery, or they left the Democrat Party over the welfare system. So this walking away of Democrats is kind of a tradition. Like this is an old thing. Like that's who the Republicans are old Democrats. So so it is actually a little bit more complex, but it's not what they're saying it is. So anyway, I forgot why I was saying that in the beginning. Oh yeah, okay. So the Democrats, they were using the slaves for their numbers to get their electoral college numbers up. So they lost the election. The Civil War happens. Okay. So we're talking about a party, we're talking about a Democrat Party that has been in power for almost, I don't know, a long time, like at least 60 years. They've got this whole thing planned out. They were going to secede when it wasn't going their way. Now they have to give up their slaves, which means not only are they giving up their free labor, they had, and I think the number was like at the time, at the end of the Civil War, there was like 5 million freed slaves, I believe is the number. So let's say, so that's 5 million slaves, 3/5 compromise, that's 3 million population, 3 million, constituents that they don't get to claim anymore. So they're losing their free labor, losing their constituency. The Republican Party gains well, not 5 million because women weren't voting, I guess, but okay, let's say that it was only, I think it was men. I don't think it was landowners at that time. It might have been just landowners, but let's just say they gained 2 million voters overnight, the Republican Party. The Republican Party gains 2 million voters overnight. Overnight. They're now granted the full rights of people. And they have gained 2 million voters who are never switching, okay? They're not going anywhere. These are, they've got these voters, they've got their children voting, their children's children. No one is leaving the party of Lincoln, okay? How do you think the Democrats are going to respond to this defeat, guys? Like, do you think they're going to go gentle in the good night, or are they going to just become insane? They already were insane already during slavery. Now they've lost their labor, their land is shot to hell after the war. They don't have the numbers anymore, and the Republicans have gained numbers out of nowhere that just should not even exist. They just suddenly exist now. Poof, you're people now. Poof, you're Americans now, and you're voting for us forever. We're all one party, and then the Democrats are over here. Of course, they launched they did whatever they could do to get back on top. And it took them, what, like 80 years? They did whatever they could. If that meant figuring out another way to re enslave all the black people, if they had to lie to those black people's faces and tell them whatever, guys, it only makes sense. It only makes sense. They certainly didn't change parties, and they didn't have a change of heart over generations. They're thinking, how do we get back in there? Which also involves bribing Republicans, which also involves pretending to be a Republican when you're not. Like, it's nasty. And the black people really got caught in the crossfire because, like, when you look at what happened with Reconstruction, which they pulled out of the South, the federal government pulled out of the South because the Democrats basically held the election hostage. Like, we don't know anything about that. They basically held a fraudulent election, and they had to, in order for the Republicans to get the president that they voted for, they had to compromise and take the and remove the federal government from the South, which ended Reconstruction. And then after that was the bloodiest period in African American history. So, at what point did they switch? Is what I'm asking, because they certainly didn't switch in 1870, whatever. I mean, that was 20 years after the whole debacle. So yeah, they've been trying to get back on top forever, and they finally got back on top really in the 60s, during the civil rights movement, which is a whole other thing. Uh, I have felt hinky about this civil rights movement for about, I don't know, I'd say about maybe 5 years. I've been like, there's something off about this. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something off about it. And basically, I was right. So, but we'll get into that on a different day. So that was the part that I left out. That was the part that I left out. So now I'm putting it back in. All right, now I'm really done. I promise.